Welcome to part two of my final senior portfolio presentation. In part one, we discussed the communication department requirements for the portfolio, which included a writing sample, my analytical sample, and a computer skills sample. In part two, we're going to cover the requirements for my capstone course, which just kind of add on to the communication department requirements. To find that information, scroll up here to where it says more, and I have each of the documents as its own page. So first, let's look at the infographic. Now, like I said in part one, I made the infographic based off of information from my analytical sample, specifically the document that had the chart and the research questions that we compiled with the initial data. I chose to do that because that was the purpose of making that chart, table, and research questions document, was to be able to use that information to analyze it. So to view the infographic, this is just a thumbnail. If you click on it, it will take you to the full PDF document. Now, for the infographic, I did kind of a summary of the main points of the data I found. I based each section on this, for example, off of the main three research questions that we asked, that we found data off of, and kind of summarized it in here. So if you look here, for example, racial diversity and gender diversity, here we have the main question: who are the characters and populations represented in contemporary picture books and children's television shows across categories of ethnicity, gender, and disability? It's the same question for both of these. I've just broken it up into racial diversity and gender diversity. And here you can see the percent of characters on the y-axis and the gender and racial diversity over here, and over here as well. I did it in this format because I thought it more accurately showed the vast majority of racial diversity. However, I felt that for gender diversity, a pie chart was the way to go. Now, scrolling down for the second research question: do children's television shows represent more diversity than children's books? So I just very easily wanted to compare the two, and therefore I felt that a bar graph was the appropriate course of action with this, because you can accurately depict, for example, looking at not white or unknown characters in books and television. Television has a lot more not white or unknown characters compared to just not white characters, which means in this gap, for example, are a bunch of characters who we don't know what their race is, in terms of they didn't tell us, or by looking at them we can't tell, but we generally base that off of whether or not they explicitly told us the race of that individual. Moving down to who are the writers. Who are the authors, illustrators, and writers of these books and shows in terms of their ethnicities and genders? We felt that we had to analyze not only the characters in the books, but the people who wrote the characters in the books. And if you know the genders and ethnicities of the writers, authors, and illustrators, you can get a better picture of who the characters are and also why the characters were written in that way. And the vast majority of them were white males. But that was the point of the research, was to figure all that stuff out. And the point of the infographic was to put that data that we collected into a visual format so that someone can easily read that information. So now let's go to my resume. I made this resume with Geraldine Mitchell. She is the career development advisor for the communication department. And she advised me on how to organize my resume. The main way that she put it was so my initial resume was set up in the traditional format of education at the top, and then go into work experience, but each job was its own section, followed by details of what that job was. And then at the very bottom I had awards and skills. This is set up slightly differently. it highlights more of the education because it puts it right up front first. And not only that, but I include in the education the skills I've acquired over the years through my media classes. So the first bullet point, I've included my video editing, video production, filming, and some of the software that I have the most experience in, which include Premiere Pro for video, Photoshop for photos, and After Effects again for video, and also sound. I've included the published work for the voting PSA I did for Watauga County Board of Elections, and I've also included my YouTube channel, which is a link. For someone to click on and follow, or just copy and paste the URL. But the YouTube channel is also on the home page of my portfolio. But in case I print this out and hand it to somebody, I wanted to include the link as well. For work experience, I moved all of my lifeguarding into one section and went into the individual responsibilities for that. And at the very bottom, I have my car sales experience as well. I put that at the very bottom because it is kind of the least relevant to the career I'm going into. However, I did learn some valuable skills in terms of communicating with other people, how to read other people, how to work with other people. And most importantly, I do have an award I am very proud of. I was only at Fred Anderson from January through May 2016. However, from February, March, and April 2016, I was the #1 salesperson at that dealership. And that dealership is the #1 Toyota dealership in the entire southeast of the country, which includes North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, I want to say Tennessee, but those states in that area. So I was #1 salesperson at the #1 dealership in that region of the country. And I'm very proud of that, and I wanted to include that in my portfolio because that is an accomplishment. It's an accomplishment when you consider that I was 20 at the time, and the next youngest person was more than double my age. They were in their mid-40s. So I felt that was important to include in there. Now, going to my strategic career plan, this is a document as well. If you click on it, it will take you to the full PDF document. But my strategic career plan breaks down my plan in the near future in terms of my career. It goes into where I am now, which is I'm a senior at Appalachian State. I have this much experience with video editing, photo editing, computer software, that sort of thing. I go into where I want to be, which is in the media field, video editing field. Eventually, I would love to be a documentary filmmaker. That's kind of the end goal. And I've included that in there as well. I've gone into detail what I want. And then the third step is how I'm going to get there. The connections I have, what I plan on doing. I do have connections in both the video editing world and the documentary world, both through my mother, both through her coworkers. One of her coworkers' daughters, Rachel, works at a place in Raleigh called Red Hat, and they're big on like live venues, concerts. They do some video editing. They're also a technology-based company. We have an amphitheater down here called the Red Hat Amphitheater. They own it, and they deal a lot with concerts and live shows or plays, what have you. And it's citywide, and that would be a great company to work for because of the experience I could gain there. Through her other coworker at her other job, her coworker's son is a documentary filmmaker. He travels across the world. I want to say he's in Ireland right now, as a matter of fact, working on a film up there about animals. But she has gotten in touch with him. I have not physically gotten in touch with him, but I will shortly. And he more or less offered me an opportunity to shadow him when he's in the States to kind of see how that process works, see what it's like, because that is the route I want to go down. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about my professional job interview experience. So the purpose of this assignment was to gain experience in some way in our desired field. You could either shadow somebody for a day, or if you didn't have time for that, you can interview people in that industry. I chose to interview people just for the sake of time. I interviewed two of my classmates who work for App TV. One is um, he is the host on the A Game, which is a sports show. I'm not really understanding sports, but it was cool to see what it's like to be on screen, have all the lights and cameras pointed at you, and to hear his experience. I interviewed someone in my class who is the operations manager, and she oversees a lot of things that the network does, including the channels, the shows, the actors, actresses, props, make sure everything is in working order. And it was cool to see her views of behind the scene, because she's in the studio every day making sure everything works the way it should. So it was cool to see that point of view as well. And then last but not least, I interviewed Rob Gelber, and he is the general manager of App TV. He was one of the founders. He's behind everything. He generally manages everything. And my interview with him, because he is a bit older and has more experience, was more focused on getting started in the media industry, in terms of like what to expect, how to freelance, advice he has. One thing that stood out from his interview specifically was to watch your reputation. Your reputation will follow you for years and years to come in that industry. For example, if you're hired by somebody to do a film shoot or set up equipment and you don't show up, that will follow you in the long run. So always be the guy who shows up, because somebody won't show up, and you want to have that reputation of being the guy who's always there. And he was probably my most beneficial person to talk to, because I got to talk with someone who was in that industry and to see how he got started. And it gave me ideas on how I can get started, who I can talk to, who I can go physically meet and see. And through this process, through my strategic plan, through the media studies department, I have learned what I want to do. And yeah, that concludes my presentation. I wanted to thank real quick all of my professors I've had that helped me to find my path, find what my passions are, find what I want to do with my life. Um, I have greatly enjoyed my time at App State. Um, I've enjoyed all of my professors, all of my classes. I've enjoyed the mountains and the snow and the freezing cold and the hot summers, and I am truly going to miss it. I feel like I am leaving my home. In conclusion, the thing I tell people all the time is this last semester, because it is my last semester, I've been counting down the days until I'm done with college, and I can go out and start my life. But now that the end is here, now that I graduate in a week, I'm counting down the days until I can come back. Thank you.